Hey everyone, thank you for coming in to this awesome episode of Impact Interviews today. I think you're really going to like this guy. His name is Pete Garcia. He was 20 years a medevac pilot, but he's much, much more than that. He was also a guy that has written quite a few books and hundreds of articles that have been published all over the world. Pete is extremely versed in Bible prophecy and world events. And let me tell you, he has a unique perspective that I think you're really going to enjoy listening to. Today, we get into everything from his past as a pilot to the bloody years of Iraq and Lebanon to all the way to where we are in the world and even why in the world is all of this alien stuff going on. You're going to be amazed at the knowledge and the wisdom God has given this guy. So I hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you next time on Impact.
The Impact.
Living in a memory.
Guys, thank you for coming to the Two Pros channel. Today, I am really excited. We've got Pete Garcia. Pete, would you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you come from, what you do now. Now, I believe you were in the service, which was really interesting to me as well. So, kind of give us a who you are, an introduction.
Well, I'm from Texas, and I graduated from college in 2002 and commissioned in the Army. So I graduated in May of 2002, and so September 11th, 9/11, that was that fall semester for me. So commissioned as an officer, went to join the Medical Service Corps, but then I went from there to flight school, from there to Korea, and I was a medevac pilot for the next really through the next 20 plus years. So deployed to Iraq, deployed to Afghanistan twice, deployed to Saudi Arabia. So I've been to Korea, was in Europe in the 90s. I retired in 20, and I was going into the airlines, and then got hired by United to be a part of their regional program, and was kind of on path to do that, and COVID shut everything down. We got letters from the airline saying, "Hey, we're shutting our training pipeline down. So if you aren't already in the system, you're just gonna have to wait." And so from there I got recalled back into active duty to work in a COVID task force for like 7 months, and then from there, I finally was like, I'm done. Like I can't do the military stuff anymore, and basically took about 6 months off, and then I got picked up with FEMA, and I do right now I'm doing site inspections. So whenever there's a disaster, I get sent out to the site, and I basically do measurements, photographs, documentation of whatever the damage is.
Goodness.
And so as of right now, I'm in Eastern Kentucky in the mountains, so it's pretty cool working up in the hollers and all the backwoods.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you've been in that hotel a while, because I watch you on Monday nights, and I'm like, I don't think Pete ever goes home. So
No, I've been here this is my 8th month, so I am going home at the end of this month. So finally.
wow. So you can be deployed up to a year.
Like 50 weeks. Yeah.
That's quite a bit. So tell us about your, now I know you have a website, Rev 310. I'm on it all the time. I love that. You do a lot of writing. Where did your writing career start, and kind of give us an update there?
So in 2007, before 2007, I was pretty much a wayward prodigal son kind of Christian, very backslidden. I grew up in church, but I'd spent about the previous 15 years just in the world partying and doing what young single bachelors do, and having fun and traveling the world and doing all that stuff. And I had my come to Jesus moment there in the fall of 2007, and I think I told you a little bit about this before. But I spent the next I don't know, that next year I was deployed to Afghanistan. I spent that year, and then the subsequent couple of years really just investigating, getting back into the roots of my faith and what do I believe, and how do I know what I believe is correct, and It was around 2011 that I get invited to write to this website called the Omega Letter. And it was run by a guy named Jack Kinsella, and Jack Kinsella had worked, 10 plus years with Hal Lindsey, who wrote the book Late Great Planet Earth, and one of the most, I think it was a best-selling book of the 70s. And so to be invited to write, that was not anything, that wasn't in my wheelhouse. That wasn't anything I was comfortable doing. I told God, hey, use me for something. And I was going out, I joined the Gideons. I started going into prison ministry stuff, and nothing really seemed to take at the time. And this whole writing thing was new to me. I wrote in college, I wrote school papers, and then I wrote in the Army. I did like, technical writing. I wrote evaluations, but I never wrote anything for fun, anything that I was passionate about. And that was 2011. So I've been writing, what is it now? 12 or 13 years. Like I have 700 plus articles, 5 books. Yeah, it's just, I never, if you'd have told me this, 12 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you, because writing wasn't anything I was good at or interested in.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's what happens when God enables you to do something. That's really neat.
yeah.
So you told me a story about when you were in the military, and most of the guys that are on this channel are fitness guys, bodybuilders, guys that are interested in that type of thing. And you told me a story, or a couple of stories, that you knew a couple of guys that were really deep into the steroid abuse, that type of thing. Um, and you told me one story in particular that I found just kind of heartbreaking, but a friend of yours, or a guy that you knew, or thought you knew, I guess I don't want to ruin the story, but tell us about him, what happened in your experience with that. Am I clicking on the right story we're talking about? Do you remember this one?
Yeah. Yeah. No. Well, let me back up a little bit. When I was in
Okay.
college, I was working in Austin, which is the downtown part. Sixth Street is, all bars, and it's all, um, nightclubs, dance clubs, all that kind of stuff. And so I worked down there for a few years, and one of my good friends, well, an acquaintance, a good acquaintance, he was 25. He died of a heart attack. And when I was told the news, and everybody was in shock, and we were like, wow, what happened? And he was using steroids. And so I don't know the kind or how much, but I knew he was, pretty big guy. And
Yeah.
that was the first time I'd ever been exposed to anything like that. So years later, now I'm in the Army. I'm in the 101st. I'm a platoon leader, and one of my team leaders, who was a lieutenant at the time, um, he oh, let me set the stage a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, right? Still a bachelor, living large. I go to church one Sunday, and this is where I have the come to Jesus moment, right? And I'm sitting in church, and I'm in the last service. There's 3 services to this church, and there's nobody in front of me. There's nobody behind me by rows. So, I don't have anybody to the left or the right of me. And I hear this voice, just 3 words, ring out in my ear. And it's not me. It's not me saying it. It's not my, you know, my thought waves or anything. It was completely like somebody had injected these words into my head from somewhere else.
Right.
And I immediately was like shocked, and I was immediately sitting up, because at this point in my life, I wasn't going to church a whole lot. I was going maybe once a month, and really just to check out chicks. And it wasn't, it wasn't like,
Yeah.
it wasn't my priority at the time. But I felt guilty not going, so I'd go to the very bare minimum. So I went to this, and so there I am, and I hear these words, and it shocked me out of my kind of daze. I don't even know what they were talking about on the stage or anything. And so, all right, I was like, all right, God, if this is from you, have the pastor call me this week. I need to validate this, right? Because I don't know if it's God speaking to me or the devil or whoever.
Right.
And that guy didn't know me for Adam. Like, I mean, I could have walked right past him in Walmart, and he wouldn't know who I was, right? So sure enough, that dude calls me. So that was Sunday. He calls me Wednesday at noon. I'm on the flight line. We're, working on aircraft and stuff, and my jaw just hits the floor. I was like, man. And I told him this, and he probably thought I was a nutcase at this point, but he was inviting me to some military men's Bible study or something. I don't know. But that was how it started. And so from there, I got a school that I'm going to in Texas. And my friend, who was an amazing guy, like he was an amazing friend. He and I partied together all the time. We used to run around together. And he was, you know, 0% body fat. I mean, the guy was just ripped and just in
Yeah.
phenomenal shape. You could have made a statue of this dude, and put it up in a coliseum or something, and he would have just fit right in with the rest of like the Roman gods or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I'm in school in San Antonio, and it's a Sunday and or a Saturday night. My friend calls me. It's like 3 in the morning, and I was like, man, he must have forgot that I'm here. And he's probably drunk. He's probably out partying or whatever, having a good time, and forgot I was gone. I'll call him tomorrow. And so that next day, which would have been a Sunday, um, I completely forget about the phone call. I'm at over at a friend's house eating lunch, and my boss calls, my commander calls calls me from Kentucky, and he's like, "Hey, where are you?" And I'm like, "I'm eating lunch at a friend's house," and he's like, "I need you to go outside." And I was like, the first thought I had was like, "Oh man, I'm in trouble. What did I do?"
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking, well, it's not me. I didn't do anything. What did one of my soldiers do? So I go outside, and he said, "Well, we had a death in the unit," and I was like, first of all, that's just terrible news to hear, you know, period. But my
Right.
first thought was like, Private so and so killed on a car accident or something to that effect. And then he said my friend's name, and he said it was him. And I was like, I mean, he had just called me the night before, and that all came rushing back to me. And and I said, "What happened? Car accident?" And he goes, "No, he took his life." And I was like, I mean, I felt like a horse kicked me in the chest, and I had no air, I had no breath in my body. I slumped back against the car, and that was the first time I'd ever felt something like that. It was it really took the air out of me.
Yeah.
And I spent the next because we didn't know what happened, that night. So there was, an investigation and stuff that would happen. But later on, as we go and help clean out the house and help take care of the effects, we find, a bag of steroids and a gym bag size. And so I'd asked him previous to this because he and I worked out together a few times, and
Sure.
I'd asked him, I say, "Hey, are you juicing or anything like that?" And he's like, "No, man, I don't touch that stuff." And I was like, "All right." I just kind of took him at his word, and come to find out, he had been. And between that and drinking heavily and some other things going on in his life, it was just like this perfect storm of negativity. And I don't think he intentionally shot himself, but I think it put him in the state of mind to play with his gun and to be kind of toying with the idea. And it from that moment on, I mean, that really, really just impacted me in a really profound way. And that's where that whole come to Jesus moment, this is where that it starts from there. From that moment on, I get married a couple of months later. I deploy a week later after that, go to Afghanistan. And so I'm wrestling with all of these emotions and all of these things that had just happened. And I just lost one of my best friends and just an amazing guy to something so preventable. And the fact that I could have answered the phone that night, and maybe that would have made, all these things are going through my head at the time. And I was a mess.
Yeah.
Between that and then that year in particular in Afghanistan was really violent. It was a really violent year. Um, if you remember in Iraq, the Iraq Contra war there, 2004 and 5 and 6 were really, really violent years. So I got there in 2005. And then General Petraeus at the time, they did the surge, right? They surged all these troops in there. All
Right.
those fighters just went and they left there and went to Afghanistan. So I go to Afghanistan a couple years later, and it's just then starting to get really, really bad there. So it was a really, really kind of
So you
tough
were
few years for
medevacing
me.
guys out,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Uh,
yep.
were you guys shot at a lot?
You know, I don't remember me getting shot at flying. I know we've had some guys get shot at. But the thing is, when you're in a Black Hawk and you've got all the engines going, I mean, you don't even hear it, unless you
No.
see a smoke trail coming from a RPG or something, you're not going to see, or it's at night. If it's at night, you might see some tracers and stuff. But during the day, it's so loud. You're really not going to know until you land and you come outside and you look at your aircraft and you was like, oh, there's a bullet hole. That hole wasn't there before. So, but yeah, so
Awesome.
I didn't personally, but we did in our unit. We have guys get shot at.
Man. Well, I wanted to kind of switch up a little bit because you write about so many things. And me, my wife, and my whole family, we all listen to your Monday nights. And I mean, we love them. And I always like your perspective on things. Most guys that are Bible prophecy guys or guys like that, it seems like most guys think along the same stream. And then I know when I listen to you, I hear things, I'm always like, wow, I didn't even think of that. And then I'm like, I don't even think anybody thought of that. Where did that even come from? So um, I really wanted to kind of move into, and you had texted me earlier about something that you were thinking about, kind of a subject matter. And I was like, man, that is really good because I wanted to go, and I still want to go a little bit into how the end times are playing into this deception with the aliens, what all of this stuff means. And I know you've written about that. You've talked about that quite a bit. And then you also said you'd like to touch on how the global elite are trying to ruin strong men.
Yeah.
That really piqued an interest in me. And I think that would really pique an interest in these guys as well, because I think most of these guys that watch the channel, most of them, whether they're Christian, non-Christian, they're really into the fitness, and of course that really can consume you. I, like you, I ran from God for 15 years. I was actually a pastor, had a daughter that was born sick. She was number 29 in the world with what she had. I took care of her till she died, and I became bitter and angry with God, and I was gone for 15 years. And I went back into bodybuilding, and did that whole thing, just angry, rebellious, and all of that stuff. And so I've asked God to redeem this area of my life. And I can't run away from it. I can't say it didn't happen. It did. So, man, I want to reach these guys. So what do the global elite, what are they trying to do? What is the culture trying to do with men, strong men, or just men in general? Do you see that's really making a difference in what we're seeing in men today?
Well, believe it or not, the subject of UFOs will tie in with this idea of how the global elite want to ruin and are ruining strong men, and not just strong men, but the image, the idea of strong men, of the dreaded P word, the patriarchy, the idea that men have dominated things for the last 6,000 years or more. But there's a quote, I wanted to read it. It's by Michael Hoff. It's in his book, Those Who Remain. And it's a very familiar quote. You'll know what I'm talking about as soon as I say it. It says, hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good time create weak men, and weak men create hard times.
Yeah.
You might have seen the meme out there. Well, it's from a book, and this guy was writing this story.
Wow.
And I got to thinking about that. And I think what we're seeing today with all of the craziness in the world, and nobody can deny this, things are just upside down clown world at this moment. I mean, there's just things going on that defy logical explanation. And I think, but what we're seeing here is we're seeing a culmination. We're seeing the fruit of this, the harvest, if you will, of like 120 years worth of deconstructing America and deconstructing the idea of strong nations, for the sole purpose of destroying the United States to create a one world system. And
Yeah.
I know that phrase "one world system" gets used and abused, and I think people kind of like shrug their shoulders and think, well, that's, people have been saying that forever. What, you got to think about it this way. You ask yourself one question, and whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, ask yourself this one question: is the world more like Revelation 13 today than it was 100 years ago? or is it less? And what surprised me, and this whole thing got this what I'm about to tell you is what got me thinking about this. Um, well, I was working on a conference project. You know, I'm going to be speaking in Oklahoma in October, but so I already had this, was working on this. But then I saw a Joe Rogan podcast, and whoever he had on with him, they were talking about the digitalization of cash.
Yeah.
And then somehow the Revelation 13 thing comes in, and so Joe Rogan reads it. He reads Revelation 13, and at the end of it, they're like kind of jaw on the floor, like, wow, like that is spot on. Like that's what we're seeing today.
Right.
So you ask yourself, is the world more like that, or is it less like that than it was 100 years ago? And I think the evidence is undeniable that every every um, every spectrum, every area, every section of this world, whatever you want to look at, the economy, religion, the culture, politics, everything is trending toward this idea that we have to come together as a planet. And part of breaking apart this Westphalian concept of sovereign nations, this Westphalian, the Peace of Westphalia, that goes back to 1648, and it's this idea that was adopted that said that nation states they are sovereign over all their territory, and it's even enshrined in the United Nations. But now here we see the United Nations saying, hey, we've got to strip all that away. We need to come under one system. And we're doing that through Agenda 2030, the Great Reset, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, all these different things that are going on. And the digitalization of cash is just one thing, right? It's a key thing in maintaining control over the whole population. But what I was mentioning about strong men is that in order to break, what is a nation made of? Any nation is really built on three pillars. There's a social pillar, there is a political pillar, and there's an economic pillar. And part of the social pillar is these ideas that have held nations and groups together for thousands of years. The idea of a family, the
Right.
nuclear family, a man, a woman, offspring. That's the natural order how families have existed for as long as humans have existed, right? Um, the other idea is religion.
Yeah.
What religion rallies that community together. The other things are social constructs. Who does the roles in the society and things. And strong men have been a part of that social construct going back millennia, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the nuclear family. That's a strong father figure that provides for the family, protects the family, um, is a role model to the son and to other young men that may not have fathers in that community. And they step up and they do these things. And we have those in our society today, but it seems like it's becoming less and less. And the government, going back to the 1960s when they incentivized single parent or single motherhood through
Right.
the great what do they call it? I can't think of the name. LBJ put it out there in the 60s, and basically it incentivized unwed mothers to
Right.
they can still exist. They don't need a husband in the home, and that's destroyed the Black community. I'm not the only one to talk about this. This is
Oh
well
yeah.
known and well documented.
Absolutely.
But when we have the government that's working actively to destroy men, you've got the destruction of the family. You've got the ease of which divorce has been introduced into our society, abortion on demand, which was law for 40 something years, and that's a whole generation plus that's been wiped out just due to that.
Yep.
Just the promotion of aberrant lifestyles that if you were to let those lifestyles continue on, they don't perpetuate the civilization, they don't perpetuate the population. You start to see a population growth or decline. And then you've got the other things that are real subtle. And here's kind of where I wanted to go with all this. And it
Yep.
is a little bit controversial because in the in the bodybuilding community, I'm sure you guys, this is more your wheelhouse than mine, but you have the introduction of, we talked about steroids earlier and how
Yeah.
really terrible that is. That's one extreme over here. But the other extreme over here is this introduction of BPA, soy, all these different chemicals that get put into into products, into food, into maybe guys are they're buying into this idea they need to drink unfermented soy milk to
Ugh.
clean out their colon or something, and it is raising the estrogen level in men to, I mean,
Yes.
like, it's, there's estrogen in food, there's estrogen in
Right.
all sorts of things, so you're already getting it, and men produce estrogen, but men
Right.
predominantly produce testosterone,
Right.
and women predominantly produce estrogen, and they do produce a little bit of testosterone. But it looks like, if this is testosterone and this is estrogen, and then, here's women here and they produce a little bit of testosterone and a lot of estrogen, and men over here produce a little bit of estrogen and a lot of testosterone. It's like they're trying to reverse the roles in those things,
Oh,
like they're trying
absolutely.
to
Yeah.
feminize or emasculate men. And we see it in the culture, we see it in movies,
Even in
Indiana Jones
college,
5.
I mean, they teach courses on, on not being a man, what do they call it? Toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
And I'm like, really, you cannot be a man anymore. And
Mhm.
now a man is not somebody that can lift a lot of weight or weighs 300 pounds. I mean, the mentality that bodybuilders have, is a lot of times, especially, I think the bigger I am, the more man I am. That's actually the opposite, I think, in a lot of ways, because it doesn't take a man to stuff yourself full of drugs, to look like a gorilla. I mean, that's not a man. I mean, if you look, men, especially in the bodybuilding community, you see the divorce rate is so high, promiscuity is unbelievable. These guys have testosterone levels that are 3 to 10 times what they're supposed to be, and they can't contain their sexual urges. And they may have a wife that's beautiful, but they're out there cheating and messing around like crazy. That's not a real man. A real
Yeah.
man is somebody that can love one woman and protect her and protect his family, and you just don't see that nowadays, not just in the bodybuilding community, you just don't see it anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's really disturbing to me.
Yeah. The role of father, the role of men, strong men, has been, like you said, it's just been castigated to toxic masculinity, and even fitness now, working out, is being castigated
It's
as
racist.
racist.
Yeah.
Like, and this is where I go back to this idea that
What?
things don't make any sense anymore. It is
No.
absolutely clown world.
Yeah.
So
I did a video on the alphabet mafia, and it got immediately pulled down off of the platform, which I was shocked, because the the videos that I used in my video that were examples, I actually took off of the platform. I got them from there, and yet my video got pulled off. And I was just amazed, because I was talking about a lot about how the roles are just so reversed now, and men are just not men anymore. As a matter of fact, I was just reading of a guy in Canada who transitioned, actually had all the surgeries, and is now seeking to be euthanized up there, because he lives in so much pain from the waist down, because he had a vagina built, and he's just in pain all the time. Well, what do we expect? That's not God's design. So when we pervert everything, and we're in complete upside down world, or clown world, I love that. What do we expect? Romans 1, 2, and 3 says, that kind of thinking is reprobate. Tell us what that is.
Well, when Romans 1, what it talks about is a form of judgment that especially the last half of that chapter, and it's called the wrath of abandonment, when God gives a nation over to their base desires, and he lets them run with those things, and you'll see how destructive they become. But it's a slippery slope of just continued degradation and perversion down to this point. of where ultimately they're just fit for destruction at the last stage. And the thing is, the worst part of it is when they have their conscience seared to the point where they will never accept God. You know, I our God is a loving God, and he can rescue the druggie in the alley that's laying on his back, about to overdose, and he cries out for salvation. God will save that guy. God will save anybody that calls out to him. But there is a point where a person will reject God and continue to shake their fist at God until a point where God says, "Okay, I'm going to respect your wishes, and I'm going to let you do what you want to do, and you're going to catch the natural repercussions or the wages for that," right? The wages of sin is death. So when you reconstruct the body that God gave you, and you replace parts out of it. I heard another story of this, and it was heartbreaking, of this guy that transitioned. Just absolutely heartbreaking, because you can't just chop things off, put a hole there, and think that it's going to feel and function like the way
Right.
a woman has. It's not going to work. But the worst part of it is, there are those people that are struggling with this, and I believe this is a form of demonic attacks on spiritual warfare on people.
Yeah.
And you gotta remember, and this is how I function. I don't see those people as the enemy. I see those people as
No.
prisoners oppressed by these spiritual wickedness in high places.
Right.
And we were under that same
Right
weight
there.
ourselves, and thankfully
Yes.
God rescued us out of that, and we share the gospel to help bring light to those people. But the um the thing is, with the point of getting so far gone or so far down a particular path that you can't come back from, is probably the most frightening judgment I can think of. Where God, it's like Pharaoh, Pharaoh in the Moses. And every time that Moses goes to Pharaoh and said, "Hey, let my people go," and Pharaoh's like, "Yeah, man, let's do it." And then he changes his mind. He does this like 10 times. And
Yeah.
finally, Pharaoh's just mind is seared. He's like, "No." And that's when the last plague comes. And that's kind of an Old Testament foreshadowing of what's happening in the world. And we see that happen to cultures. We see that happen to individuals. But I think right now, with the nation we're seeing now, and the fruits of it, what I was mentioning earlier, is we're seeing this 100+ year attempt to destroy the United States by destroying us politically, economically, and socially, in order to bring us down, bring our sovereignty down, to get rid of the Constitution and bring us in line with what will be ultimately the final world government that the
Yeah.
Bible talks about in the
Let me
last
ask you
days.
something. Let's assume guys don't know what is in Revelation 13. What are we looking at in the culture now that makes you believe we're in line with Revelation 13?
Well, the Bible mentions predominantly five major nations, five major empires from the time of, and this is really in dealing with the nation of Israel. There was Babylon, there was Persia, there was the Greeks, the Romans, and then the Romans kind of branched into the legs, the statue that Daniel saw, or that Nebuchadnezzar saw in Daniel chapter 2, and then the feet of iron mixed with miry clay. And so we are in the stage, we're in like the feet right now.
Right.
And so you're talking about going back from the 5th century BC or the 6th century BC all the way until today. We've seen the world play out exactly like this. And so the Roman Empire, you know, was this final government that Daniel saw, or was interpreting this dream that he saw in the legs. And that extension would go out to the very last kingdom. The last kingdom would be in referencing to the statue, it's these 2 feet with the 10 toes, right? So that is the baseline for what the Bible says is going to happen in the last days. We see other pictures later on in Daniel 7 and 8 where Nebuchadnezzar, who was this Babylonian king, he had this dream and he saw this multi-metallic statue, and it represented all these kingdoms that would come in order. Well, when God shows that to Daniel, he shows it to him as wild animals. And they weren't just animals, they were like chimeras. They were beasts
Right.
that had different kinds of body parts on it, and said, from man's perspective, it was this amazing, just awesome multi-metallic statue that stood really tall and was just, we would look at it and be like, wow, that's amazing. But from God's perspective, these are just wild beasts, basically monsters, right? That would trample everything and destroy everything. Well, Revelation 13 is that you see that imagery coming back, right? Revelation, the book of Revelation, uses a lot of imagery and symbolism, but that symbolism isn't arbitrary. It's not just random things. It's things that are found in other parts of the Bible, and this
Right.
is found in Daniel. So John is seeing this vision, and he's standing on the shore, and he sees this beast coming out of the ocean, and this beast has 7 heads and 10 horns and 10 crowns, right? Well, the ocean, in the reference to Bible prophecy, or in regards to Bible prophecy, speaks about the nations of the world, just the
Right.
collective body of nations and peoples. And that definition is given to us in Revelation 17. It tells us that's what it means. Well, this beast comes out, it's got 7 heads, it's got 10 horns and 10 crowns. Well, the heads speak to authorities, and the crowns speak to rulership, and then as well as the crowns being the individuals. So it seems like the world breaks apart. We don't know exactly how this is going to look, but it looks like the world's going to break apart into 10 regions. And then those regions, 3 of those regions will be taken over by one guy. And then once he gets those 3, he'll take over the rest. And he'll have somebody along with him. His counterpart will be called the false prophet, and between those 2 guys, they will control all the buying and selling in the world. And they will impose a one world religion where everybody has to worship this guy. And all of that is encapsulated into this biometric technology that gets put into the hand or to the forehead. And the numbers therein, the numbers, the code of it or whatever is that 666. And it's
Right.
the number of this guy's name, and it's his number, whatever that means. And we're not entirely sure what that means just yet. But we're the only generation in human history that's ever had the capability to even do that. No other generation, Hitler at his height of power could not
Yeah.
conquer the entire world.
No.
Napoleon, Genghis Khan, the Romans, you go all the way back to every major empire that's ever existed. There's only one that I can think of at the very beginning that was even remotely close to what will be here at the end, and that was the Tower of Babel under Nimrod, right? And at the time, everybody lived in this one little section, so it was easy
Right.
from him to control everything. But ultimately, it's going to culminate in this one world system, and we're the only generation that's had the technology to do that. And now, when we're looking at a day and age where the United States is seriously considering getting rid of its paper money, it's cash money, the dollar, which is dominated for the last, at least in our country, 240 years, is
Right.
the main form of currency. Now we're saying, hey, we want to go to a digital system, and we have the technology to do it now. And the main thing that the biggest problem everybody has with this is that once you go to a digital system, it basically becomes a surveillance currency. You will not be able to buy anything. I don't care if it's a stick of gum or go to a yard sale or whatever. You have to pay with this system, right? And
Yeah.
the government will be able to monitor every single purchase you make, and they can begin to curtail your buying and spending habits, or even how they pay you, if they don't think that you meet their political quote. You're not up to their political standard. You're not towing the line with whatever messaging they want you to do. So you think about the last couple of years, and I won't say what it was, but we all know what the medical thing was, that if you didn't have this, you couldn't go to work, you couldn't go into certain stores or restaurants. It wasn't so bad in Texas, but in other states, I hear it was really bad.
Right.
But even in my job, there was a lot of pressure for me to take it, and I said, no, I'm not going to take it, and here's why: XYZ. And I said, if I have to quit, I will. I don't want to, but if that's what it comes down to, I'm quitting. Right? I'm
Right.
not going to stay here and do that. But eventually, that was rescinded through a federal judge's order, and so that seems to have been kind of pushed back a little bit. I think that's a foreshadowing of what's going to come with this mark of the beast system that will eventually come. And at that point, the people are either going to have to take it, or they are cut out of the system and they'll be left to starve to death. And eventually they'll be beheaded, and be rounded up in these camps and then beheaded, because they refuse to um, join this new system, this new world system.
Now let me ask you something. If you're a believer in Christ, if you've been saved, will you be here during that time?
No. Well,
Right.
let me clarify that. Just like we see in the world, right? We see in nature, we see a diversity of animals, we see a diversity of birds, we see a diversity of plant life, fish life, um, microscopic life. We see a diversity in the heavens with the kinds of planets and stars and cosmological things that are out there.
Right.
There is also diversity in the people that God has chosen. And there was people that God chose in the Old Testament, and they were basically those people who lived by faith and belief that God would redeem them at some point in the future.
Right.
The just shall live by faith, right? And that's when we read Hebrews 11. It talks about all the hall of faith and all of these great people, both Jews and Gentiles, that that weren't saved in the sense that we are because Christ hadn't come yet. But they went when they died, they went to paradise, and they basically were waiting for the Messiah to show up. And so when Christ was crucified and buried on the third and was in the grave, in his death, he went down to Hades at that point, and Hades was divided into two compartments, and you had the unrighteous on one side called torments, and it was just flame and pain. And on the other side, you have paradise. He came down there, preached to those wicked, and said, "You get what you're getting what you deserve."
Right.
And he's going to be justified in judging them. But on the righteous side, he takes them back up when he ascends, as it talks about in Peter or in Ephesians, that he took the captivity captive and took them to heaven. So they are now in heaven. That at the end of his resurrection, at the end of those 40 days, he tells his disciples, "Hey, stay here in Jerusalem, and the Holy Spirit's going to come, and you'll receive power from on high." And that basically, when the Holy Spirit came down, that ushered in a new age, a new dispensation that we've been in for the last nearly 2,000 years. And so during this whole time, Jew, Gentile, male, female, black, white, you know, free, slave, it didn't matter. If you placed your faith in Christ, you are now part of what they call the church,
Right.
which is this multi-membered corporately singular body of believers that span 2,000 years. We belong to the church. Those people that lived in the Old Testament times before Christ came are part of what we call the Old Testament saints. And that goes from Malachi, which is the last book in our Old Testament, all the way to the first book, Genesis, right?
Right.
Well, after the church age comes to its end, it's going to end like every other age has come to an end with some kind of a judgment. And the judgment is when Christ comes and receives his church to himself. We call that the rapture of the church. The rapture in the Greek is harpazo, and you won't find the word rapture in the Bible, but unless you have a Latin Bible, but in our English Bible, we translate that word to being caught up, right? You're going to be snatched up out of here if you are a born again believer. The dead in Christ will rise first. They'll be resurrected and given these glorified immortal bodies that can never die, never age, never get sick. Basically, you are immortal forever in these
Right.
perfect bodies, and I call them Superman bodies to my kids to explain like what we'll be able to do in these things, right?
Yeah.
Um, and at the same time, the those that are of us that are alive, if the rapture happened tomorrow, you know, I might be sitting here working at my desk, and I'm going to hear the shout and the trumpet, and boom, we're going to be up. We're going to be translated immediately from mortal to immortal, from corruptible to incorruptible, and that's Christ has taken us back to where He is, and we will be with Him for the bema judgment, and then the marriage supper of the Lamb, and then we'll return with Him at Armageddon, and we will basically wipe out along with Him. I believe He'll do most of the wiping out. We might be doing some of the cleanup operations, but wiping out the wicked armies in the world that are tried to wage war against His return. So we won't be here. Now, those folks that are left behind after the rapture of the church, the Bible says in Revelation 7 that these people, there were so many people that come to faith after the rapture. It'll be one of the greatest, if not the greatest revival in the history of mankind. The rapture is going to happen, and it is going to, I think, wake a lot of people up to realize,
Oh
hey,
yeah.
there is supernatural. The world really, reality is supernatural. We've lived in this kind of suppressed time period during human history, at least these last 2,000 years, where the supernatural was not the normal. We live in sort of this, we call it the natural world, where everything kind of has to follow the laws of nature and stuff, right? We see that there are things now today that are violating that, like the UFOs. And if you think about the Tic Tac video that Commander Fravor recorded in his I think he was in F-14 or something, F-16,
Yeah.
or maybe an F-18, and he's got it on his FLIR camera. He was saying that there is nothing that we have in any nation that he knows of, anything in our arsenal of the most modern equipment that can even remotely come close to what this thing was doing. It was violating multiple laws of physics, multiple, so we can get into that in a second, but my point was is that the world, because God is supernatural, he is reality.
Yeah.
We live in basically a construct of that he has created. We're in this big fish tank, right? And the whole universe is, and it operates under certain laws that he put in place, right? He is not bound to those laws, but we are. But he's going to take his church, these people that have been washed in the blood of Christ, been born again. And it's not that we're so good or we're so righteous that
No.
we deserve salvation. No, no, we're just people that have placed our faith in what he already did on the cross. We've just been receptive to that, and we'll be removed out of here. But those people that are left behind, they will constitute basically three groups of people. You're going to have what they call the tribulation saints, those folks who place their faith after the rapture, and they are going to basically ultimately come to some form of martyrdom for their faith. And better that though than to take the mark of the beast and be damned forever. Because if you take that mark, you've just signed up to spend an eternity in the lake of fire, right? But if you place your faith in Christ and you fight and you run and you survive, and make it to the end, you can enter into the millennial kingdom in your physical form, and you'll live for hundreds of years, even to the end of that millennium, which is that's a whole nother thing. But then you'll have the Jews, right? So the when I mention the word tribulation, that's a word that's thrown around a lot. It's not technically the most technical word we can describe what's coming, but it's the 70th week of Daniel, which is there was 7 years, so it's a week of years, and it's the 70th week, right? And it's during this time period that Revelation, from Revelation 6 onward, really focuses on. And Revelation is fairly easy to understand. It goes in order. It tells you how to interpret the book.
Yeah.
But there were 69 weeks. The 69th week ended when Christ was on the cross. And we've been in this kind of pause ever since. But there are certain things that are going to happen that when they happen, that's what triggers that clock to start again. And it has to do with the nation of Israel. So Jeremiah, who was an Old Testament prophet for the audience, he wrote in Jeremiah 30, verses 7 through 11, and summarizing it, he says the point of this time is God is going to destroy all the nations. The system of the world right now that we're in is under this Roman Babylonian system that Satan has controlled for the last 6,000 years. God is going to destroy that, and he's also going to discipline the nation of Israel and bring them to the breaking point where they recognize that Christ was the Messiah, and they're going to finally cry out to him, right? And that's where that's what ushers his return at the second coming. And when he returns, Armageddon, those armies are all lined up ready to fight him, and he just wipes them out, and we're basically doing cleanup stuff in the background. So it's his show. We're just kind of there to see it. We're riding on horses.
Let him handle it.
Yeah.
Wow. So this is awesome. So when we are talking about the last days, what started the last days?
Christ. When Christ, it says in Hebrews that in these last days that God sent his son, born of a woman, and so it basically when Christ rose again and ascended there in Acts chapter 1, that ushered in what we call the last days. So something to think about. I know a lot of people that aren't religious, or they don't go to church or whatever. This is kind of an easy way to think about this. Everybody's heard of Abraham, I'm sure, Father Abraham. If nothing else, they've heard of the name in relation to the Bible, right? They've heard of Jesus, and they've heard of Adam. right? Those are three of the most popular names that even non-church people would understand or know.
Right.
From Adam to Abraham was 2,000 years. There was a 2,000 year time span between Adam and Abraham.
Right.
And from Abraham to Jesus, there was 2,000 years. And we are at the end of that 2,000, or excuse me, from Abraham to Adam. I'm all twisted now. Adam to Abraham, 2,000 years. From Abraham
Right.
to Jesus, 2,000 years. And from Jesus' first coming to his second coming, I believe will be 2,000 years. And so the year 2030 is, or somewhere between 2030 and 2033, is going to be the 2000th anniversary since Christ was last on the earth.
So
So
why
if
is it?
pattern holds,
My apologies. So that's interesting because the world is super and hyper focused on 2030, right?
Mhm.
That can't be a coincidence.
No, I don't think it is. And I think, you know, we we argue a lot, even within Christendom, we argue about what year exactly did Christ was he crucified. I know a lot of my friends think 2030. I tend to think 2033. Other people might think 20 or 29 or 31, somewhere in there. But it's in that 4 year window that we know for sure historically that Christ was crucified. And what's interesting, like you just pointed out, is the fact that the United Nations is super hyper focused on with their Agenda 2030. The World Economic Forum is focused on 2030. The fourth industrial revolution, all of these things that they are trying to do seems to center on 2030. And the only thing I can think of is that we we weren't there, right? We weren't there when Christ was crucified. We have gone through at least two calendar changes since that time. There's always a debate as to when exactly Christ was crucified, but Satan was there.
Yeah.
Satan and his demonic forces were there. They were there cheering it on. They know exactly what day, what year, what minute. I mean, they were there. They watched the whole thing. These are beings that they're immortal. I mean, they basically they don't die. They were there when it happened, so they know exactly when it is. And we know that the leaders of this world, are being greatly influenced by Satan and his fallen host, fallen angels. And somehow he's got it in their mind to focus in on this year. So there is some significance, at least in the spiritual domain, to this year. And it could be that it's the year of the rapture. It could be that it's the midpoint of the tribulation. It could be we don't know. We don't know,
Yeah.
but there's something about that year. And so what's interesting too is this fall, they've got a 7 year, the United Nations is reconvening this Sustainable Development Goal Summit with all the nations, and they're convening for 7 years. And so, my question is, why 7 years? Why not 5 years or three
Yeah.
years or 2 years or 8 years or 10 years? And it's mind-boggling that these guys seem to be intent on fulfilling things, at least to
It's
some
like
kind of a
they're
biblical
reading the
standard.
Bible every day.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
So
So
when
yeah.
you talk when you talk about what are the things that the signs of the last days, it's a lot of little things,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of big things too. The nation of Israel, and in fact, let me conclude with this point. There were two major things that I know that signal that we are in the last moments of the last days. The
Mhm.
first is the miraculous rebirth of national Israel. Israel, the nation of Israel, who had been relegated to the history books for the last 2,000 years, roughly, had become a nation again, against all odds, had become a nation again in 1948. And then the second thing is the convergence of all the other signs. In Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, this is called the Olivet Discourse because this is a conversation that Jesus has on the Mount of Olives. And his disciples were asking him about the last days. And he begins to give them all these signs. He said, you're going to have deception like at no point in time in history the deception will be so great that even the elect would be deceived if possible. He said there will be wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, pestilence, signs in the heavens, the love of many growing cold. That means the just people are going to start getting mean and angry, and just there's going to be a turning, a souring of the world, right? But that's not it. He said it would be um, that these things would be like birth pangs, right? And so I have five kids. I was there for the four of my children's births. I delivered my son or I got to
wow.
deliver them. And so I've experienced this. I'm familiar, at least in what the woman has to undergo from a male perspective. I'm watching this, right? I'm not enduring that kind of pain that they are, right? But when the pregnancy begins, it is going to end in a birth. If not messed with or anything like that, a natural birth is it's going to have a culmination point. And before that child is born and that woman enters into the third trimester, she's going to start having those contractions. And
Yeah.
those contractions start coming harder and faster and harder and faster and harder and faster until ultimately her she's dilated and you can actually begin to she begins to give birth, right? That's what Jesus said. And he reinforces this in Matthew 24:36. At the end of the Olivet Discourse, he goes, when you start to see all these signs, know that the end is near. I'm right at the door. So there is a laundry list that I don't even have time to get into today, but of things that culminate with all of these in every kind of section of society and of the world, economic, political, military, religious, etc. So,
Man. Now I've kept you over. I
no,
said I was
no,
going to be the one guy that didn't keep you over. I did.
no, I'm good for about 3 hours. So,
Yeah. Look, here's the thing. I did a video on the alien thing, and guys, guys were very interested in that. And I know that I truly believe this is a part of the end. I think that this is a part of the deception. Um, tell me about what you see biblically. And I know the Bible doesn't say that aliens are coming. Okay, that's not. But how does all of this tie into that Matthew 24? How does it tie into the deception, or how do you believe it ties into the deception? Because I got to be honest, nobody saw a world tyranny coming through the health system, right? I mean,
right,
nobody
yeah,
saw that. I mean, now we have the World Health Organization literally about to take over the nations of the world with, and everybody's just handing them the power. Nobody
yeah.
saw this coming. No Bible prophecy guy. No, I don't think anybody saw any of this stuff happening the way it's happened. I'm not sure that the alien thing, everybody saw that coming. Well, maybe they did, but how do you believe this ties in? I mean, what are these things? I mean, these guys, are they real? I mean, when I heard him talking about some of the things they're seeing, these big round things with something inside of it, a square or something inside of it, I started thinking about Ezekiel, and I'm like, I
Mhm.
mean, what are we seeing? I had a lot of guys go, they're demons, they're demons, they're demons. I agree they are, that they are, but what are they doing? What's going on?
I don't think it's an accident that the most famous or maybe infamous UFO story that's out there is Roswell. That happened in July of 1947. That crash in New Mexico, near Los Alamos. Well, what happened? Not even 6 months later, Israel, the United Nations voted to do the partition of Israel. It wasn't called Israel then, but it was the partitioning of Palestine between a Jewish state and an Arab state. So not even a year later after Roswell, in May of 1948, the nation of Israel declares itself a nation, right? So I don't think it's a mistake, or I don't think it's coincidence that Roswell happened when it did. I think Satan is a fly on the wall. He can hear the conversations. He could see where
Oh
things are
yeah.
going to head. And I think after the Holocaust of, during World War II, that there was just enough world sympathy to where he's seeing, okay, Israel's going to be a nation again. I need to lay some groundwork here for what I see at the end. And I think Satan is playing the long game in this, right? So he's laying the foundation for what will become a 70 plus years of desensitization, of exposing us to things we can't explain, right? And
Right.
so for the last 70 plus years, there have been UFOs traversing the world. We had Project Blue Book, Blue Book, that was meant to go out and discredit all these things. But eventually, the one thing that people have said for the last, I don't know, since at least the 1960s, is that the United States will never admit that there was alien life or that they have alien technology that they're
And
controlling
now
it.
look.
And so yeah, and so now it's what we call this disclosure, where it's irrefutable evidence that, and you've got such credible eyewitnesses that are coming forward that people can't ignore it anymore. So
Right.
I think part of this is going to be play into the deception, and I see it playing out one of two ways. One, if the rapture is such that you and I are sitting here and it happens, and all that's left is a smoking pile of clothes, um, the UFO phenomena, I think the skies will be littered with UFOs, and then the narrative that the world's going to try and push is that, oh, this was UFOs took all these people.
Right.
The second scenario is that if we are translated in a twinkling of an eye, so we're sitting here, and boom, all of a sudden we're in our glorified bodies. We hear the trumpet, the shout, and all that, and we get transformed, and people around us see this, and then see us get snatched up. Um, it's going to be harder to refute the rapture. So, in the Bible, if you think about every scenario where somebody is caught up, whether it's Christ when he ascends in Acts chapter 1, or the two witnesses that get raptured up in Revelation 11, or Elijah when he gets carried away in this chariots of fire, he gets caught up or whatever. People were there, people saw it with their own eyes, and so they were eyewitnesses to these events. So it depends on how this plays out exactly, but I think Satan is playing the odds on this, and if we do just disappear, then he can immediately send these, I believe, to be fallen angels to go litter the skies with this technology. And then people are just going to try and, people that aren't familiar with the rapture begin to correlate the UFOs appearing and all these people disappearing, right? So I know that I make the distinction between a demon and a fallen angel, in the sense that a demon, I think, is a disembodied spirit of the Nephilim that were on the earth before the flood. The flood wipes all the Nephilim out, but their spirits don't have anywhere to go because they're not fully angel and they're not fully man. So they're always
Okay.
looking for things
What?
to inhabit.
Yeah. Tell them what a Nephilim is.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's great. No, I mean, this
Yeah.
is awesome. Yeah.
In Genesis 6, Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, so he's writing the account of creation of humanity. And in Genesis 6, he talks about the condition of the world at that time. So Genesis 6 is about 1650 years into, or 1600 and about 1550 years into creation at this point. Adam had already died. They're about 9 generations in, and the world's population is somewhere in the neighborhood of somewhere between 5 billion and 18 billion. And the reason
Billion?
that numbers are so big, huh?
Billion with a B.
Bi-
Billion.
yeah, billion.
Okay.
Yeah, because at this time, when you read Genesis, people were living for centuries,
Yeah.
hundreds and hundreds of years. So think about how many kids you could have and how many kids they could have, and so on and so forth. So there's a huge population in the world, and the world was incredibly wicked and given over to violence and to everything. And so what we read in Genesis 6, chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, is that God is making this comment that there were giants in the world in those days, and that they were the offspring, that these fallen angels, these angels that when they fell, rebelled against God with Lucifer, Satan, they came down to earth. Some of them came to earth, and they began to impregnate women, and they began to, because angels can manifest into physical bodies.
Okay.
So they began to impregnate women in the hopes of corrupting mankind so that a Messiah couldn't come. Well, how did they know about a Messiah? Well, the only information, at least that's recorded in scripture that we have, is Genesis 3:15. You have Adam and Eve in the garden. Everything's
Yep.
perfect. They don't have any sin. They're in a state of innocence. And Satan comes down in the form of the serpent, or this reptile dragon kind of thing. And he seduces Eve into eating from this tree that God said don't eat from. That was the only rule they had. Do not eat from this one tree, because when you do, it's going to ruin everything. But he convinces her to do it, because if she does it, she'll become like God. So she does it, and then she gives it to Adam, and Adam ate willfully from it because now he knows his wife is corrupted. And I don't know his motivations, but he wasn't taken by surprise when this happened. He did this willfully. He willfully sinned.
Right.
And so God is judging the three of them. The serpent, who is now possessed, Satan is possessing this body of the serpent, Eve and Adam. He judges Adam, he judges Eve, and then he tells the serpent, who is Satan, he goes, out of the seed of woman is going to come one, and you're going to bruise his heel, and he's going to crush your head, meaning he's going to destroy you. So somebody from the race of man is going to come from these humans, and he's going to destroy you. So what does Satan spend the next 1600 years doing? He begins to try to corrupt mankind genetically so that a Messiah could not come. That's the only logical thing that could make sense.
Right.
And we see that when angels, these fallen angels, were having sex with human women, their offsprings were Nephilim. They were giants. They were. When we think about Greek mythology or Roman mythology, all the mythologies and mythos from all the different cultures in the pagan world, those all are rooted in some kind of truth, and that truth is what the world was like prior to the flood. So God wipes out that world, and he saves Noah and his three sons, Noah and his wife and his three sons and their wives. And that's where the world repopulates from. But Nephilim aren't fully human. They aren't fully man. They have some kind of a spirit, but they can't go anywhere just yet. And so they are always looking to possess bodies. Fallen angels, on the other hand, um, these say full-blooded, but these full-blown fallen angels, they can manifest, they can look whatever they want. They don't have to possess people.
Right.
In fact, we look at Satan. Satan only possessed one person according to scripture, and that man was Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Christ. And he's only going to possess one other guy into the future, and that will be ultimately be the Antichrist. So he's only done it. It'll only be twice that he does it. You got to think about an angel, how powerful these things are. Um, it, just just thinking about all the different eyewitness accounts, people that have said they've seen him, and so on and so forth. Angels are very big. I mean, they're like 9, 10 feet tall, extremely powerful. Like Superman couldn't even touch these guys. Like they would destroy Superman in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
And demons or fallen angels are just like that, except they're wicked and they're evil and they're violent and they hate humans. They hate us and they want to destroy us, and they will use whatever means possible. So in this age that we live in now, this dispensation, since the last 2,000 years, the Holy Spirit has been acting. Part of his ministry has been to restrain wickedness in the world. And I know we look at the world today and we think about how evil things are. You hear about a story about a guy killing his family, then shooting himself, or there's any number of things we could point to. But if the restrainer wasn't here, it would be a nightmare. It would be hell on earth the whole time.
And it will
So
be.
once the rapture happens, that restrainer is removed, and then it will become hell on earth.
Yeah.
So it will have a great revival, but it's going to cost those people their lives. And we see that number. John sees that number of those dead tribulation saints under the altar in heaven. And he says he couldn't count it. It was the number of every tribe and tongue and nation and people. And it was an innumerable number. So it's got to be some fantastic number that we can't even fathom right now.
Man, that's I tell you,
it's a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how do now we've got this? So what are we seeing? And my question is this, and I've gotten this question a lot. Guys are asking me, if these are demons and they found ships, why have they found ships? And if they're demons or they're spirits, what are these things, the pilots, the dead things that they're finding? How can these things have some sort of flesh to them if they're not? Is that part of the deception?
Yeah, according to one of the whistleblowers, Grush, I forget his first name, but he is saying that the
David?
U.S. is in possession. Yeah, maybe David Grush.
David, I think.
The U.S. is in possession of 12 of these craft that are being reverse engineered by the military industrial complex types that are embedded with both the intelligence community and in big tech and really secretive government programs like DARPA and things like that. They're trying to reverse engineer it. The problem is we don't have the same materials on the earth. So, but here's one of the things that I think is interesting in terms of language, how we come to identify these things. In years past, say before 2010, when we talked about UFOs, We talked about extraterrestrial life, aliens.
Right.
And now there's a term that's come out they're talking about ultra terrestrials. And these are things that are interdimensional, right? And ultra terrestrial then opens up this whole new doorway for explaining how they can do the things that they do, violating
Right.
all the laws of physics and so forth, and can appear and disappear, etc. And I think that that is probably the most accurate description of what these are. And I believe that they're forms or ranks of fallen angels that are part of this deception campaign
Yeah.
that can manipulate physical matter to include bodies, these alien bodies with the giant heads and the almond shaped eyes, etc. And they're doing it for the sole purpose of, I think it's like I said, it's to explain the rapture. If the rapture of the church, and this is what I find fascinating, the rapture is where we humans on the earth are caught up to the skies to meet Christ in the air, and then did we go to be with him, right?
Right.
Well, Ephesians chapter 2, Paul says that Satan's domain isn't in some smoky cavern in hell. He's the prince of the power of the air.
Right.
And that these demonic forces, there are echelons of these guys. There are like a military structure. They are innumerable, first of all. The Bible says that the angels are more than there are more angels than there are stars in our universe. And there are trillions of stars. And a third of those fell with Lucifer when he rebelled.
Right.
So a third of these angels are wicked, and the 2/3 are holy. So there is going to be enough of these fallen angels that can break into ranks, and they're always part of this deception. They're going to be either there to harass the church as we are being transited through the air. I think we're going to be paraded up like in a military parade through enemy territory to our into the heavenlies, right? Into this heavenly dimension.
Yeah.
And right in front of the enemy, and they're going to be there to provide the deception to the world, to explain, at least give the world leaders a reasonable explanation of what just happened. Why did all these people disappear? Why are all these schools empty and all these nurseries empty, and pregnant women now don't have babies in their belly? What's going on with all of this? Not to mention all these crazy Christians going on and on about the rapture and stuff. Where did they all go? And it's because of these aliens, right? These aliens are because they're going to be floating all over the sky, providing the part of the deception. But again, if my other scenario plays out and we are raptured in front of people, I think that will blow a hole through that whole thing. So it may Satan will then have to go to some other backup plan, and he probably has a myriad of backup plans. But
Right. Wow. So when we are raptured, when the church is raptured out and people are left here, will they start to, well, let me back it up this way. I hear a lot of people saying they believe that there's going to come some sort of announcement that the aliens are here. You know, I guess my question is, what benefit, would they have to, or how would they show up? And, you were talking about we're living in the day where we're not seeing like the supernatural really. Do you think that's going to be before we're raptured out? They're actually going to have some sort of announcement. I mean, I listen to some guys and they're like, it's going to happen anytime. They're going to come out and say, hey, we're in contact. I've heard the Catholic churches saying they want to be the first, or they want to baptize an alien.
yeah.
And I'm like,
yeah.
I mean, do you think this is really going to happen? I mean, if that happens, what does it do to your to people's Christian faith? Does that disprove Christian faith?
No, in fact, I think it may be what Jesus talked about in Matthew 24. The conundrum with Matthew 24 is that we know the rapture happens before the tribulation, but the way that Matthew 24 is structured, that had not yet been given. That information hadn't been given out yet, because he makes mention of it for the first time the night before he's arrested and crucified in the upper room, right? In John 14:1-3. And he's explaining to him, saying, hey, if I go away, I'm going to come back and take you to myself, that where I am, you'll be also, right? But they hadn't told him this yet. So all they know in terms of like the last days, was the Son of Man appearing in the skies and taking over the world, etc. And that's what they
Right.
understood. So
Right.
Jesus, they ask him this question, what's the last days going to be like? And he says 4 different times, do not be deceived, do not be deceived, do not be deceived. If even possible, the elect may be deceived. And so if there is disclosure where a spaceship lands on the White House lawn and somebody steps out of there and says, take me to your leader, and it begins this whole process.
We've seen it in the
We
movies.
right. And I think we would be wise to recognize what they are,
Yeah.
that they are some form of fallen angel, some form of wicked being that is bent on deception. And there's a whole laundry list of reasons why every time these things appear and every time these things show up, it's always for some nefarious purpose, or they're coming with some message that is anti-biblical, anti-Jesus. It's
Yeah.
never anti-Muhammad. It's never anti-Buddha. It's never anti
Yeah.
Joseph Smith or nothing. It's
That's
always
right.
focused on Jesus and
Yeah.
Christianity.
We were
So
just talking about this exactly. And they only flee or they only leave at the name of Jesus.
yep. So
I mean,
if they were holy, or if they were benevolent or benign even, the name of Jesus wouldn't cause them to run screaming at, to flee from you. That's
yeah,
what demons do. Demons flee when you
right.
mention the name of Christ. You rebuke them in the name of Christ. They will run fleeing.
Yeah.
So I think that if they do show up prior to the rapture, that it will be just one more level of that deception, and where Christ said, if possible, even the elect will be deceived. Where that fits in the Olivet Discourse, because he gives kind of a broad overview of the last days, and it's hard to find out exactly where we're in. I think right now we're probably in what we call the Braxton Hicks time period. And if when you have
How
a baby,
far in?
it's
Now, we're
yeah,
not
it's
setting dates,
no, no,
but
no.
we're not setting dates. But here's the thing that really strikes me. The world is so hyper focused on 2030, and I believe there's a reason for it. You know, if that's the case, then we've got to be within a 5 to 10 year window, right?
I
I mean,
believe
it
so. Yeah,
seems like
I believe
now
we're very
that's
close.
yeah, that's not to give everybody the idea that, oh man, I got 10 years to play around and then I'll get saved. Or it's not also to give Christians the idea that, well, I got to sell everything I have, and get ready because we still have to occupy till he comes.
Yep.
So where do you think we are?
Well, Tyler and I did a video. If you're familiar with Generation
Oh yeah,
2434, we did a video called The Final Four, and
yeah, we watch
and
those.
based on just some reasonable deduction. And as I mentioned on Monday night, the Bible gives a great outline. It gives a great outline for how things are going to happen. There are the points, the little bullet points and the sub points in there, that there's a lot of things we don't see coming, and we're trying to wrap our minds around, like 2020. That caught
Right.
most people by surprise. I mean, I can't think of anybody that said, oh, this is going to happen. So with that said, um, I think that we're probably in about a 4-year window at this time. And if we go past 2026, I'll be very surprised, simply for the fact that we know that the 7 years has to happen. This last week of years, it has to happen because it hasn't happened historically,
Right.
and it has to be fulfilled, or else the Bible lied and it breaks Bible prophecy, which can't happen.
Right.
So we know it has to happen. And if it goes beyond Christ's death, burial, and resurrection, his anniversary of that, his 2000th anniversary, it's now breaking pattern with the rest of the Bible and other places. So I don't know. I don't know. I just kind of think, and this is a reasonable deduction on, based off the evidence we gave in that video and other places, that
Right.
we're probably in about a 4-year window. We don't know the day or the hour.
Right.
And we have to juxtapose that idea. We can't know the day or the hour with the other passages in the Bible that says you're going to know the
The
season
season.
and you're going to see the day approaching. And if you're not watching at that hour, I'm going to catch you by surprise. So you got to balance those things out. And I think somewhere in the middle is doing what you just said, occupy until he comes. that, don't quit paying your taxes and paying your mortgage or whatever. Occupy till he comes. Do whatever God called you to do, and keep witnessing to people for Jesus and sharing the gospel with everybody. And three, just keep a steady eye on the sky and always have that expectation in your heart that it could be any moment. And I think regardless, we're very, very, very close. And I've always held to this time period of the mid 20s. When I had that come to Jesus moment, probably like a year or so after that, I read a great article by a man named Don Koenig. And he went through like every prophecy, every theory, everything. And he put it on this like table. And then he did all the math on there. And he's like, okay, here's everybody's ideas. And if you take everybody's ideas and then you do the whole, you add it all up and you do the average and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
He goes, the Christ's second coming, not his rapture, his second coming should be sometime in the mid 2030s. So we know that you have to go back 7 years from that moment. So it led me to believe the mid 20s. So it's like somewhere in the mid to late 2020s. And this was 2000. I think he wrote it in 2007. I read it in 2009. And it was incredibly disheartening to read that in 2009 because that
Lord.
just the 2020 seems so long away. It seems so far away.
And here
But
we
now
are.
here we are. Yeah.
I know.
And so
I just turned 57, and I was sitting there when I turned 57. I was like, how did I get here? I mean, it's like when you're in high school, and you're sitting there day after day after day, and you're looking at the clock thinking this day's never going to get over with. Then you're looking at this month is never going to get over with. Then you look at this year is never going to get over with. And before you know it, you're in college. And before you know it, you're 57 years old. And you're like, how did I get here?
Yeah.
What would you
I know
say
exactly.
to guys who are caught up in this lifestyle? What would you say to those guys who have that I'm my own God mentality? My body's so strong, I'm whatever, nothing can touch me. In the light of everything we talked about, what would you say to those guys?
Well, I want to paraphrase C.S. Lewis a little bit. He had a quote, and he says that we are like little children that are satisfied with playing in the puddle when there's like a beautiful beach right on the other side of the wall, and there's this gorgeous ocean right there, right? We're satisfied to play in this muddy little puddle, like we're settling for so much less. And I don't care who you are, how strong you are, what your body fat is, what your girlfriend looks like, or your car. It can't even hold a candle to what we're going to go into here. When we get raptured and we're given these glorified immortal bodies, First John 3, I'm paraphrasing this as well, but he says that when this happens, we're going to be like Christ was after his crucifixion or after his resurrection.
Right.
We're not going to be him, but we're going to be like that, have those same type of capabilities. And what could Jesus do after his resurrection? Well, he could appear and disappear. He could travel at the speed of thought. He could walk through walls and then sit down in a chair. So he can manipulate physical matter, but he wasn't constrained by physical matter.
Right.
He could eat. He ate like 5 times after, after his resurrection. So eating is not going to be an issue. So you're going to be immortal. Nothing will ever hurt you, break you. You won't ever stump your toe or pull a muscle in your arm or your back or whatever. You'll never get hurt again. You won't even age. You won't age. You won't get fat. You can eat whatever you want. You'll never gain a pound. And you'll be in these indestructible bodies, and you will be the perfect version of you. That's the way I describe it to my kids.
Right.
Whatever I would have looked like had sin not tainted the human race, and we're hundreds of generations in now. We maybe thousands of generations in, and we inherit all these genetic corruptions like diabetes and all these things we're predisposed to.
Right.
Your hair is going to fall out. Your teeth are going to get old and brittle. Your eyesight, like I can't barely see hardly without glasses anymore. Love handles, all of that stuff. I don't care what kind of shape you're in now. Eventually, time and age is going to catch up to you.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't settle for playing in the puddle. And that's what this world is. And you know what? You know how bad it is? You could go to the most beautiful place on the planet, and that is a trash heap compared to what heaven is,
Right.
right? Satan is furious when in Revelation 12, when he is cast out of heaven, he tries to stage some one other little fight in heaven. He's cast down to the earth. So he is permanently banned from ever going back into that divine realm again. He is furious that he's trapped on the earth. Furious because this place is a trash heap compared to where he came from
Right.
and where heaven is. And so this world, I think if people settle for the best that this life can get now, apart from Christ, this is the closest to heaven you'll ever get. As crappy as this world is, this is as close to heaven you'll ever get. And if you are a believer in Christ, this is as close to hell as you'll ever get. You
Yeah.
know, and however good or bad your life is here, that's as close to hell you'll ever be. So
Right.
I would say that we should stop selling ourselves so short and focus on the things that matter. Christ said in the gospel, he said, don't build your treasures here on the earth where moth and thieves, moth will destroy it and thieves will steal it and so on and so forth. He goes, build in heaven where you'll have it forever, you
Right.
know? And I think people get this misconception that heaven's going to be boring, that it's just going to be one long church service and that we can't eat. We're just going to be playing harps all day, sitting on a cloud. That is not what heaven is, folks.
No.
Heaven, first of all, you're in a mortal glorified body. You're perfect,
Yeah.
and you're like Superman, better than Superman. Two, um, God is endless. We could be in heaven in the eternal realm. Let's just put some numbers on it. Let's just say we're there for 30 trillion years. We will never come to the end of God. We will never not be amazed at what he can do,
Yeah.
you know, and we'll be able to eat in heaven. We'll be able to eat meat, you know.
Yeah.
Somebody, a friend of mine, Lee Brainerd, came and was talking about this and why this is an important concept. There's no such thing as eternal veganism, right?
Right.
Um, and somebody said, well, how are you going to kill if there's no death? How are you going to kill a cow to make a steak? And I'm like, God spoke the universe into existence with just his mind, his thoughts. He
Yeah.
could he can make a steak appear, just out of nothing. The most delicious steak you ever had. Maybe it's a 94-ounce steak, and you'll be able to eat it and not gain a pound, right? It'll be the best steak
Yeah.
you've ever had. You'll be able to eat. You'll be able to travel. God is a creator God, and he loves to create, and he loves diversity, and he loves to explore and expand. And whatever your passions are here on the earth, he's going to amplify that to the nth degree as long as those things are wholly and in line with, if your passion is killing small puppies, you're not going to be able to do that. But like if your passion is building things, right, or climbing or exploring
Right.
or
Yeah.
building things or writing or whatever it is that it is,
Yeah.
you will have your heart's intent to do those things.
Man. Man, that's good. Man. So I've kept you a long time. So tell me, how do these guys get in on this?
Well, it's easy.
How do you get in on heaven? How do you get in on it, man? Is it by being good? I mean, how do you get in on this?
No. In fact, there's nothing in and of ourselves that we can do to get this. We can't be good enough. We can't give enough money to the church. We can't join enough church committees or donate enough clothes to the poor or work enough soup lines or anything to earn salvation. In Romans 3:23, it says, "For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." We all have fallen short. And that word sin means to miss the mark. And so if I'm an archer, right, and I'm pulling my bow back and I shoot and I miss the mark, well, that's what sin is. We've missed it. In fact, the very best that we can do is filthy rags in God's eyes in terms of our works. What can we give a God that can speak anything into existence? What can we give him? The
Yeah.
only thing that he ever wanted from us was our love. He wants us, he wants to be reconnected with us. And because he is holy beyond our even understanding of holy, and we are fallen and sinful down here, there was there was a gap between us that couldn't be crossed. And so what Christ did, or what God did, was that he provided himself a sacrifice through his son, who became a man, subjected himself to the limits of a man, and lived on this world. Remember, I mentioned earlier, compared to the divine world, this is a trash heap.
Right.
And he allowed his creation to kill him. And he came here knowing that that was going to happen. And in Hebrews, I think it's Hebrews 11 or 12, it says that for the joy set before him, he endured it. He knew that at the end of this, what it would reap would be that he would be reunited with his creation, and we would become sons and daughters to him forever, right? And that we came to him of our own accord because we love him and we love what he's done for us. God is here, we're here, and we're destined to hell. We're already on this highway to hell, and there's no stopping it. The brakes are out, and we're about to hit the cliff. Everybody's on that way, and if God did nothing, we would just go there, right? Because that hell was created for the devil and his angels, and we're going to have to go where they go. But he intervened, and he jumped in the way, and he said, no, here's a way out. Come to me, and here's the way. You believe on what my son did, and if you believe on him and you believe on his finished work on the cross, you will be saved. Period. You can't climb Mount Everest. If salvation were dependent upon us climbing on our hands and knees to the very top of Mount Everest, maybe 0.0001% of humanity would have ever made it, right?
Right.
99.9999% of the humanity would not have been able to do it, and we'd just be doomed to hell. But he made salvation such that anybody, a child, an adult, somebody on their deathbed, anybody could place their faith in what Jesus did. They just got to cry out to him, just like the thief on the cross who was already about to die. He looks over at Christ and he said, Lord, remember me this day when you enter into your kingdom. And Jesus said, today you'll be with me in paradise.
Right. Wow.
There was no preconditions. There wasn't, oh, well, you need to get down from the cross first, go get yourself baptized, go get a haircut, go do a bunch of good works. No, today
the
you will be with
rules.
me in paradise.
Yeah.
So you admit you're a sinner, you acknowledge that you can't save yourself. You believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and his finished work on the cross. You call upon his name for salvation. In Romans 10:9-13 says you will be saved.
Right.
Not you might, not just you could possibly. He says you shall be saved. And it's that easy. And when that happens, what God does, even as a bonus, as like an added bonus, he seals you from the inside out with his Holy Spirit until the day of redemption, until this day of rapture. And then when Christ returns, it's like a giant magnet, right? You put a magnet over a table and it has a bunch of plastic and a bunch of glass, and you put some nails and metal and stuff scattered in there. The magnet's going to draw up like material. It's going to draw up anything that's metal that will come up and be, because that's what it's attracted to, right?
Right.
That's like us. He's going to come down to the sky, and everybody that's connected to him through salvation, we are going to be yanked out of here. So
Awesome. Well, Pete, man, that is awesome. I hope anybody that hears that will today call upon the name of the Lord and be saved. I know, man, I did a long time ago. Don't do what I did. Don't do what Pete did. Don't run from God. If you have been saved, sell out now, man. I mean, you don't have much time as far as I'm concerned. And even if there's 100 years before Jesus comes back, I have gotten to where I don't want to meet the Lord having been in rebellion, man. I want to hear whatever time I have left. I want to hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. So
amen.
that's
Yeah.
what this channel's about. And Pete, man, I'd love to have you back, man. I mean, this is so
I would
good.
love to come back.
Terrible.
Yeah.
I feel terrible. But for me, dude, I'm not trying to reach the church people. I've had a lot of criticism, I've had a lot of criticism from church people for the channel. And I tell them, I've said, you guys don't understand. Paul said, I become all things to all men so that I might by all means win some. This is what I did. I'm no longer doing that. I'm no longer involved in that. I'm no longer in that world, but I'm trying to ask God to redeem that world to him. I mean, those guys need to be saved. Those people, those girls, nobody's reaching these guys. And these guys have such a God mentality. It's really unreal because it's such a godless I hate to even call it a sport because it's subjective, but man, I just, I just have a burden for these guys, and most of them won't talk to me anymore. My wife and I were both pros, and I won the universe and she won the North Americans, and in the same year, 60 days apart, we both became pro, and all of those people are gone now. None of them really talk to us, but so many of those guys that I competed with are dead. And guys that I sat backstage knowing what the plan of salvation was, knowing those guys were lost, and a lot of those guys are dead, and I said not a word. So
Me either, man. My buddy, I could have if
yeah,
I was in rebellion, I was that was just something I didn't care about at the time, and now I
yeah,
look back on it and I think, man, a huge regret, and I don't want people to live with that kind of regret. So take
no,
advantage of the time that you have.
yeah,
Even if the Lord, let's just say the Lord doesn't come back for 100 years, you don't know if you'll die tomorrow. You could get in a car accident tomorrow,
yeah,
like heart attack, a giant rock could fall on your head. You never know. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. We're not
yeah.
guaranteed our next breath, much less our next day. So today
In
is the day of
this,
salvation.
yeah, in this sport, and I'm just wrapping it up. In this sport, some fitness influencer dies young. It seems like about every day or every other week or something. It's just had some guy out in Germany, some big fitness influencer died at the age of 30. Dude,
Mm,
I'm talking about in the prime of your life, you're going off into eternity and you have no clue what's going to happen. That's
scary.
That is scary. So I know when I got right with the Lord in 2019, I asked God for 15 years because I ran from God for 15. And now if God gives me 15, that's great. If God gives me more than that, that's great too. But I asked God for 15 years because I was like, God, I just don't want to go out that way. Just whatever, I would love to have 15 years to, you can't ever make up for anything. And I get that. It's the grace of God that leads you to repentance. But I was like, God, I would just love to have 15 years just at least in my own head, in my
Balance
own
the,
head,
the scorecard. Yeah.
something. Yeah. So, hey, thank you again for coming. Like I said, love to have you on. This is not reaching. This is to reach unsaved. And I love your story.
Fine.
I would like to actually go into at some point, kind of go into your story a little more and kind of what brought you back. Where were you? How did you get saved? What brought you back to the Lord? Because I find that interesting. I know in my own head, when I came back to the Lord, I had that struggle with, was I even saved or not? You know,
Mm.
and I think there's so many guys that have contacted me and said, Jeff, I got saved back here. I sincerely asked the Lord, but I've been running for all this time. I don't even know if I'm saved now. I would love to answer those guys too,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I think that's a
Well,
huge thing.
love to
So,
come back. So whenever you want to have me back, I'll come back on.
all right. Hey, thank you again. God bless, man. And thank you for being so patient. I kept you a long time. So,
No, it's fine.
all right, Pete. Thanks again.
All right. God bless.
All right. God
Bye.
bless you. Bye bye.
The impact.